Hello, everybody. Good evening, and welcome to Brain or Shine webinar with myself, Mark, and Jules.
Jules.
I am Mark with a brain injury. If you haven't met us before, and this is Jules, who lives with my brain injury every day, and me, of course. What we're going to talk a little bit about tonight is mental health following a brain injury, which we'll come to that in a moment.
Because what we aim to try and do here at Brain or Shine is to educate people on what it's like living with a brain injury. So what it's like for Mark with the injury, but equally what it's like for partners, carers, families, friends, and also, you know, the whole work environment as well, because it's it's a huge subject. It's massive. There's so much that we can talk about in terms of what happens following a brain injury, the hidden disabilities, irrespective of what might have happened to you physically. And it really is about educating people. And this month, because earlier in the month it was Mental Health Awareness Week, we thought actually it would be a good month to look at the effects or that mental health or happens to your mental health after suffering a brain injury.
I guess really the starting point is what mental health actually is. And it's a phrase that I think we became aware of a few years ago, and it sort of started to gain momentum and people started to use the words mental health. And it became more talked about and a little bit more open in recent years, and especially for men as well, because you've had a lot of years of phrases where people will say to you, "Oh, man up," or "boys don't cry," and all these sorts of things as well. And it became more acceptable for men to actually have feelings. So obviously there was a sort of a divide between the sexes there, I guess. But we all have mental health, as Jules was just saying a minute ago, just like we have physical health. Our physical health is very, very important, and we know the consequences of a good diet versus a bad diet, or exercise versus no exercise. But mentally, we need to exercise our brains, we need to exercise our well-being, and we need to create positivity within our lives as well. Positivity versus negativity have massive, massive impacts on our mental health. Now, throw a brain injury into the part, and that makes all those things sound a little bit less simple, really.
It does, because after a brain injury, it's natural for those new life challenges to sort of, I suppose the best word to say is shake your emotional well-being, because so much is going on, so much may have changed that you're possibly feeling things that you never used to feel before. So, for example, fear, because you become fearful of the future, fearful of what might happen next, fearful whether you can ever be the person that you used to be. There's all sorts of things around there. That then can cause anxiety because you're fearful, but the anxiety again about all those different things, and also sadness. Now, I will say, as a partner of somebody with a brain injury, we feel those feelings as well, because we're fearful, we're scared, we're not sure, we get the anxiety and we feel the sadness because of what's happened. So it's a real big thing, and it can have huge effects on both parties, and that huge ripple effect that we've spoken about before. It just expands from partners to your children, to your brothers, your friends, everything. So it's huge.
And also physical health and mental health. I guess if you're affected physically through your brain injury, this can have a big impact on your feelings towards yourself. So I'm fortunate, as many of you know from following our story, I don't have any physical side effects. I can run, I can play sport, I can do pretty much all the things I used to be able to do beforehand physically. But what I find difficult is to accept that I can't do things mentally. Now, if you throw the physical restrictions in there as well, I can imagine that could explode tenfold for somebody else if they're struggling to walk or they're struggling to do something that they did before. Maybe somebody, we have a friend who had a stroke and struggles to use their hands. So simple tasks like picking something up, I can't put myself in those shoes because I have no problem picking something up. But if you've lost that ability as well, that can also bring a lot of frustration, it can bring a lot of anger, it can bring a lot of stress, and it can also bring a lot of those feelings to the person around you, because then all of a sudden they've got to start picking things up for you, so to speak, haven't they?
Yeah, and I guess with you say there's no physical after effects in terms of, you can still walk, you can still dress yourself, you can still do your running, you can still do physical activity. But one of the things that we are very, very mindful of is the impact of fatigue. What you do lose is your balance and your spatial awareness, and you do drop things a lot more when that's there. You will walk into doors, you will walk into tables, all sorts of things like that. So there is that side that
definitely
is there. But also after the injury, you did suffer from anxiety, and it was apparent, but we weren't entirely sure that it was anxiety because thankfully we hadn't really had to deal with that previously. So I think in the early days after it, the irritability, is that a word?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, absolutely is.
I thought I'd made that up. Became very, very apparent, and the short temper and stress levels that he never had before, they were very, very apparent.
Definitely, yeah. It was strange, really, because I think I knew what anxiety was, but until you feel panic attacks, you don't really know what they are. And I do remember having a panic attack over what was apparently nothing really. It wasn't that I went into a situation where I walked into a room and it was, oh my goodness, it was actually at home. And I just done a run that particular morning. And I just went upstairs on the bed and I just remember the whole room spinning and everything like this. And it was just a real surreal experience.
That's very surreal. That would,
yeah. Mouthful to say there. But again, if you don't know what these things are and you don't understand them, then it is really, really hard to deal with them. We've talked in the past as well where we've said about acceptance for the brain injury. And acceptance is a really hard word as well, because I remember Jules saying in the early days, and we still sometimes say, that I couldn't accept that I was suffering with anxiety. I couldn't accept that I was suffering with low mood and depression. But I don't think it was the fact I couldn't accept it. It was the fact I just didn't understand it as well. So those two things go very, very close together, because if you don't understand something, you can't say, oh, I know exactly what this is. I understand this now, so I can accept it. So it is very, very, very difficult to say, oh, yeah, okay, everything's fine. I can just deal with that now.
Yeah. And I mean, you still have bouts of sadness and times when you just feel like you want to cry, you feel very, very tearful, all these emotions. It's still there. And a number of occasions we went to the doctor with the symptoms. Is that the best way to do it?
I suppose it is.
And he did say that he thought that Mark was suffering from depression and offered you medication. And Mark, being Mark, refused that. And like with all this whole journey along since he had his injury, I've always respected his wishes, because he knows how he feels inside. I can only see what I see. So he was really, really adamant that he didn't want to take any form of medication. I found that quite difficult a little bit, because the anxiety and the depression was really affecting our relationship, and it was making it quite hard to understand, but I couldn't talk to him at all. And he was very, very unreceptive to talking about it, and very, very unreceptive to doing a lot of things. So we just sort of, I don't know, bounced around, from day to day, not knowing what was going to happen each day.
Absolutely. I see Hugo's just popped on there. Hi, Hugo. It's always good to see you online. And saying that you've lost your balance a few times, difficult to understand why you lose your balance. And this is something that actually happened to me minutes before we started this webinar. I bent down to pick something up from underneath the table, thought, fantastic, I'm not going to bang my head on that table, stood up and whacked my back on the shelf. And it's like, ow, I was so concentrated not banging my head there, and didn't see the shelf. But you said the anxiety is definitely the biggest impact on you, and the feeling of guilt towards your wife and children. And before that comment popped up, Hugo, I was about to say that somebody shared an amazing poem on the peer-to-peer support group on Facebook yesterday or the day before. You were saying about tears, and it actually brought tears to my eyes because I was reading it and I was thinking, I think I'm that person sometimes. It described how this lady had almost sort of lost the fun from her husband and his personality, and how much she loved him, but how much it made her sad because this person had almost disappeared and withered in certain ways. And I remember being that person in the early days, and sometimes I feel I'm that person still. And the guilt, as what Hugo's just said in there, the guilt on your wife and children, the guilt of people around me, the guilt on friends and everything is just, it never goes away. And when we write stuff, he was writing something the other day for social media plans and our content for next month. And you just went, oh my goodness, that was too emotional.
It was for this month. Yeah. It is really emotional because this month what I decided to do slightly differently was, because we were talking mental health, is I would try and do it from both perspectives, the person with the brain injury and the partner, because I think it's important that we respect and acknowledge that the paths are quite similar, but they are different, and it's very, very hard for each of us to sort of navigate this. And sort of going back to those bouts of depression and when you were very, very lost, I literally sometimes I would walk into the room and he would just be standing there with his arms down and almost just like rocking, and I'd say, "Are you okay?" And you'd be like this, but that was all I would get. It was very, very difficult and very, very hard to bring him out of that. And I didn't know where he was. I don't know where he was mentally, what had caused him to sort of lose that sort of not grip, but just lost in himself. But it wasn't like he was sitting down. He would just stand up and just be standing there and almost like rocking. I know. It was very, very difficult.
Definitely. We also talked a little bit about PTSD, didn't we? Prepared some stuff on PTSD in the lead up to this. And PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. The first time I ever heard about that, I remember it being linked to war veterans.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of talk about it around the Vietnam War when I was a kid at school and everything. I didn't really understand what it was, but as growing up, I thought PTSD, that's when you go through a major trauma. So people see things that they shouldn't see in war, for instance. And I remember coming across it in being linked to brain injury and thinking, oh yeah, because
it's real.
I used to replay over and over again what happened with my accident. I mean, I just went to a toilet, blacked out, and knew nothing about it. And it was really strange because people used to always say to me, well, what happened? Well, how did that happen? Did somebody hit you around the head? Did you get attacked? Were you drunk? Did you slip and fall over? And it's like, I don't know. I really don't know. And in some ways, I think it was probably good that I didn't know. But in other ways, it made that PTSD massive for me, because I used to go to a public toilet, especially in a bar or a restaurant, stand there and think, how did I fall over and hit my head on this side? what was I? Probably guess what I was doing in the toilet. What was I doing to cause me just to fall like that? How did I fall? I got a bruise on my shoulder here. Did I land on my shoulder first? Did I land on my head first? Did I land on them both at the same time? Did I fall that way? Did I fall? I obviously didn't put my hand out because I didn't have a bruise on my hand. And that used to replay over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And it was really bizarre because obviously the accident was on holiday. I say obviously, not everybody knows that. But the accident was on holiday. And we actually went back to that restaurant some years later. And I went to the toilet and I stood there and I replayed that act over and over again in my head. And it sort of made sense, even though I still didn't know what happened. But that was a time where I managed to let it go a little bit. I've heard of a friend who was involved in a car accident and went back to the scene of the crash. And they didn't have a lot of memory of it because the car was hit from behind, so they weren't expecting it. They were knocked unconscious and they woke up in hospital. But they actually found by going back to the scene of the accident, it helped them.
Mm-hmm.
Counter that, I've spoke to somebody else who's also done a very, very similar thing and gone back to the scene of the crime, and they found it made them worse. So I'm not suggesting that that's a solution to PTSD.
No.
But it works for some people and it doesn't work for others.
Yeah.
And of course,
And it is really, really hard, isn't it? And I think the thing with PTSD for anyone is, the memory gap of like you're talking about, it's lost. And I often think, is that your brain just completely wiping it out because you don't want a memory of that, whatever caused it, for example, obviously you fell, but if it was a car accident or anything, say, you fell off, you were doing some DIY or Pilates, do you know what I mean? You don't really want that memory of that fall or whatever it is. But so there often is that amnesia surrounding the actual incident that caused the brain injury. And I know for you that caused you an awful lot of trauma because it was difficult because people, like you said, people would ask, "Oh, what happened?" Well, we don't know. And that made it hard because, it was also a lot because Mark's hidden disabilities are hidden. So unless you knew the pre-Mark, you don't know pre-Mark, right? There's a shop called that. The Mark prior to his accident to the Mark afterwards, you wouldn't pick up the differences or recognize things. So yeah, at one point it was torturing you, wasn't it? Not knowing.
Yeah.
But as you said, I think now, because it was 13 years ago,
maybe even 14,
that we've come to terms with the fact that we'll never know exactly what happened. But the most important thing is we now know what the results are of it and how that's affected us and how to manage it. And to be quite honest, that's managed to lessen that trauma of trying to work out.
Yeah, definitely. I think when we pieced it all together and almost created what you call a reconstruction, a crime scene reconstruction. I remember probably about 6 or 7 years later, eating some seafood and having an adverse reaction to it and finding it really hard. Like I felt like I was going to pass out, and I'd had experienced this a few times, and I pieced together that perhaps I'd eaten seafood, gone to the toilet, blacked out, hit my head, complete freak accident. And it was almost putting those things into a line and thinking, well, that's what happened. I guess for me, I didn't feel any anger against anybody in the sense of my accident, because it wasn't like a car accident, for instance. I've known people feel anger towards the person who caused the accident, which is natural. Obviously, attacks, assaults, we've come across that through the brain injury community massively. And that's somebody who's changed your life. We did have a bit of an episode with the hospital at the time, getting discharged abroad and sent away with an ear infection, which gave Jules probably the worst night ever, having to try and work out what was happening and me not knowing where I was. That caused a lot of anger in the early days, especially thinking, how dare you put us through that? And you wanted to go back to that hospital sometimes and just tearing to the nurses or the doctors that were there and think, do you realise what you put us through? But then you have to come to peace with that and think, actually, do you know what? That person, they didn't intentionally think, do you know, I'm going to send this guy away because he's in danger, but I don't care.
No.
It just doesn't happen like that at all.
No.
So coming to terms with things is a big step.
Wow.
Making peace with these things is a
Yeah.
big step. I find that now, if somebody says to me what happened, I can rattle off the story without thinking about it massively.
Yeah.
And I have a less of an emotional attachment to it now because it's like, that's what happened. This is where I am now.
That's it. And Hugo, you said as well that you've got no recollection of your main injury, and you were asked by paramedics where you were, and I said, of course I do. They were asking Mark. They asked him his name, which he did remember that bit. He said, Mark. He said, where are you? And he was like looking at me and looking around, and he couldn't answer the question. They asked him how old he was. He couldn't answer the question. Obviously, they asked him what's happened, and he's like blankly like, I don't know, because at this point, all this blood is coming out of his nose. He's being sick. He's clearly done something, and he didn't even know where he was. He didn't even know we were on holiday.
Yes, that's right. So we're going to talk about how to maybe look at these emotions and how to deal with them. And I think for us, first of all, I mean, we've mentioned this in previous webinars and podcasts, is having the understanding in the first place, understanding what brain injury is, understanding what fatigue is, understanding what PTSD is, and understanding what memory functions are and how they work and how they can become affected. If you understand those, you have to become at peace with them again. I'll use that word, that these things will affect you. So I'm at peace now with the fact that fatigue is going to affect me. I'm not saying for 1 minute it's not frustrating. I absolutely feel devastated sometimes. I have to go and lay down, or I can't function, or that my voice slurs, or that I bang my back on the shelf or something. Those things do devastate me. But if you can find what triggers them, then you can move forward with them. So I know being in a noisy room triggers my fatigue, for instance. We've, again, mentioned this on previous webinars and podcasts. Now, I'm not saying that I'm going to avoid every single noisy room. But sometimes I will look at ways of managing that. Is it going to be a noisy place? Do I need to go there? Should I go somewhere else? Should I sit in the right place? And so on and so on. So that's...
I think one of the things that we've sort of written about is understanding what's called the frustration gap, and that's what you're talking about. The anger or that you feel is not about particularly like the person in front of you. It's about that internal struggle that you have, because your brain takes so much longer to process a task. Then you get frustrated. Then the anger starts to build, doesn't it? And then you can snap, snappier than you were before. And yeah, it just builds, doesn't it? And I think finding what it is that causes you to trigger your anger, your sadness, your fears, your irritability.
Yes, well done.
Yeah. Then if it is certain things like noisy spaces, that's a big common sort of thing that we see an awful lot. It's definitely that noisy spaces, lights, people, lots of people around you, all sorts of different things going on. It's just too much for your brain to take on, and it does really just trigger, doesn't it, the frustrations and anger.
Definitely. And sometimes it can be the little things. We had some family visiting us over a few weeks, and just people being around sometimes was overstimulated. They weren't making any noise. They were actually just sitting there watching the TV. And I just thought, I just feel exhausted. I couldn't turn around to them and say, can you just stop sitting there being quiet? But it is,
and I think, and I think we've called it the power of pause. So if you feel that it's too much for you, whatever's going on, and you can feel that your anger or it's kind of bubbling, just give yourself permission to walk away. It's absolutely fine. You know, if you're with somebody, just say, I can't cope with this at the moment. I'm just going to go and take a walk over there, or walk outside the shop, or whatever it is that's doing it. Give yourself 5 minutes and do some really good breathing, because it'll just help to calm yourself down. And there's no shame in it. It's actually much better to be able to say, I've not been able to cope with this at this moment. I just need to get out of this. And I think also have like what I call exit plans. So wherever you're going, if you think that maybe it might get noisy, or there might be too many people, sort of think about, if you need to press that pause button, you need to get out, think of where you can go. If you've got the car, you know, maybe just go get the keys and just go and sit in the car for 5 minutes on your own with everything, you know, the windows done up. So just calm, you know, it's fine. Yeah.
You can also walk away from a task as well if something's stressing you out. And again, with running Brain or Shine and our main business, the Future Toolbox, when we're focusing on things, it can get overwhelming. And again, this is for you, not just for me, but it can get overwhelming if you're doing a task. It can just be that thing of like, this isn't working at the moment. Let me put it down for 5 minutes and come back to it. And that power of pause can be massive, because you can walk away and reset your brain, or you can walk away from it and think, this just isn't happening at the moment. Then ask yourself the question of the crossroads: does it need doing now? Yes or no? If it doesn't need doing now, then put it off. It's not saying procrastinate. It's not saying ditch that task forever or anything like that. But it's just saying, is there's some other point I can do this task, or does it have to be done now? This obviously goes very well hand in hand with planning, because if you've left a task to the last minute, it absolutely needs doing now, then you're going to stress yourself out. So planning is another whole exercise. But if you can walk away from that task and give yourself 5 minutes to regroup, sometimes you may be able to go back and carry on and do it, and it does work.
It does. And I think if you can recognise that and say, I just need to have 5 minutes, I need to do whatever it is that's going to calm you and your mind. I think it's, for me personally, I think it's an incredible sign of strength and self-awareness, because having that self-awareness is a really good, strong trait that you have within you. So if you can recognise that and have your ways of dealing with it, then yeah, brilliant. It's not weakness at all.
Not at all.
Not at all. Yes, absolutely. And our biggest message to everybody is to look after your mental health, look after your physical health, and look after each other, because that's what we should be doing. And understand what your triggers are, work out what you can do if things become too much, and make sure you do that, and make sure you 100% look after yourselves.
Definitely.
But yes, thank you for joining, everybody.
Absolutely.
And I hope you've managed to take away something from this. And by all means, message us, ask us, put it on the private group that we've got, or just send us through the website.
Definitely. So if you go to brainourshine.com, you can find all of our resources on there, which links to our peer-to-peer support group on Facebook. We also have all of the topics we're talking about today in the form of a blog on our website. And we have a podcast episode, which is due to come out any moment now. And you can
next week that comes out.
You can also listen to previous episodes of the podcast as well. You can register for our regular newsletters, which will obviously also remind you about these webinars. And you can find us on social media, on Instagram, and as mentioned, Facebook as well. That sounds like a lot of information. Just pick the ones that work for you. It is too much to try and do all of them. So we wouldn't suggest do all of them, just pick the ones that work for you. So brainourshine.com. And we, again, thank you all for joining us this evening, or wherever you are in the world, or whatever time it is. And we look forward to catching you very soon.
We do indeed. And take care, everybody.
Bye for now.